Hello everybody, this is Fun Police and we are back with another deck tech. This is going to be another tournament hop tier deck, and this time we are going to take a look at British Air by Hugh. I am absolutely butchering that name, so apologies, but it is this user. They brought it to the July OCC, and British Air has been an archetype that is very common in many metas. It's always been a deck that is either meta or just slightly below meta, due to its incredible power with its early game bombers and tempo tools. This list is definitely very sound, containing a lot of tools that make it just overall very effective. If you've played British Air at all, for the most part, you're going to recognize most of the cards within this list. Most of this stuff is honestly pretty standard, but there are a couple interesting things to talk about. But regardless, let's just quickly jump into the card over selection. So close air support, this is like the big reason to play British Air. It is a 1 credit and you're going to buff up so many units, or you're going to buff up like a big bomber, and it'll just win you the game early on if the enemy can't remove it. It is not hard for close air support to be giving +3/+3 or +4/+4. And it's just, that can be overwhelming if it comes down early, and especially against decks that don't have ways to deal with it. You definitely have to be a bit careful. The current meta definitely has some ways to punish you for playing close air support, and we'll talk about that later. But for the time being, that is definitely like your win con card. It's one of the cards that is going to enable you to win the game most consistently. Next up, you have the Gladiator Mk I. This is just a 1 credit 1/3 fighter. Very basic, but very effective. It can occasionally shut down enemy bombers, although really its big thing is just being a very cheap British air fighter. That can be that's just one of the really good things. It makes the Gladiator really good at enabling stuff like close air support, while also being a potential target for that. Not much to say otherwise. Then we have the Swordfish, probably the most iconic British Air card. It's a 1/3 bomber for 1. It's the parallel to the Gladiator. It is a little bit better on the offense, as if you get ahead, that bomber makes it significantly better with like close air support. But the Gladiator is a bit better to drop on a contested board, since it will at least damage enemy units that try to kill it. Both, though, are just 1-drop air units that are British. It's just really effective. Then you move on to Air Superiority. Air Superiority is your cheap early game removal combined with the combination of Gladiator and Swordfish. It's not hard for this to be 1 credit, deal 3 damage to a unit. Highly effective at just removing most early game threats, or just helping you kill off something bigger that you otherwise don't have an answer to. It is just overall very well rounded. Then you also have for the Emperor. For the Emperor is a very effective burst tool. If you have any amount of cheap bombers, for the Emperor is able to just allow you to attack for free with some bonus damage. It can very quickly mount the pressure, and we'll talk about it in a minute, but this allows for some insane burst damage for very cheap. Very potent card. Next up, you have Monty. Monty is just the kind of, you put it in every British deck. Drawing with 3, it's a mass pin, which is excellent at stalling the board. On a contested board, this can allow you to get down bombers or snowball your board advantage. And then it also can just often draw a card. It's very effective and just very useful in general. Then you have Burst of Fire. The single copy of Burst of Fire is a finishing combo. You're able to give any fighter +1 attack and fury for the turn. This allows you, alongside close air support and for the Emperor, to, for only about 2 or 3 credits, often create a unit that is like 4 to 5 attack, and then has fury and is operating for essentially free. It is not unrealistic for the Gladiator to attack for 12 damage for 3 credits from almost out of nowhere. It's very, very powerful and can give you surprise out-of-hand kills that the enemy just doesn't think that they're going to face. Definitely a very powerful finisher. Then you have the ALBACORE Mk I. This is another standard build British bomber. Being able to pin a ground unit is great at helping you control the early game board. It can ping off 1 health units. It's able to just pin even the biggest of enemy units like a monstrous IS or whatever. And it is, again, a British bomber, which is very useful. It's extremely well rounded, and you see it in almost every British air deck, and a lot of British decks in general. Then you have Finest Hour. Finest Hour, for 2 credits, gives an air unit +2/+2 and Blitz. And that is, again, really, really powerful. Being able to essentially... It is another card that allows for a lot of burst damage out of hand. As I talked about just before, combined with Burst of Fire for the Emperor and close air support, it makes something like the Gladiator just insanely hard-hitting for very cheap. Another card that allows you also works incredibly well with the Hurricane, and we'll talk about that in a second, but it is one of the best combinations. As for 5 credits, you play a 5/5 Fury with Blitz, which is essentially a Sheetan, and then it operates for 1 less. So that's, and you can have up to 2 of them in your deck. That's really powerful, because seeing as how the Sheetan is so common and so potent. Next you have Convoy HX. This is essentially just card draw to make sure you don't run out of tools and units, because this deck does have a lot of sort of combo pieces to it. And if you didn't have a lot of draw like from Convoy, you could very quickly have your hand brick early on with just a lot of these combo pieces, and then you lose control of the board and it just snowballs and you can never recover. This deck is definitely very much focused around putting the pressure on the enemy and keeping board control soundly in your favor, you know, for as long as possible, and then usually killing them with some sort of big burst damage. Beyond that, you have the Hurricane. As talked about previously, it's very powerful with Finest Hour, also very potent with close air support. Both of those are very effective, and for the Emperor is of course really good with it to lower that operation cost from 2 to 1. The Hurricane is definitely one of those cards that you see the most when you're killing people. If it sticks on the board, it can oftentimes just snowball and kill the enemy. But oftentimes you'll also just hold it until you can use like Finest Hour or something like that, and then kill them from your hand with some sort of big burst combo. Definitely a very effective tool, especially if the game drags late, which it can happen. Then you have HMS Illustrious. This is just another like standard Brit Air card. You just get 2 bombers with Blitz on them. It's just really effective in general. It allows you to supercharge stuff like close air support, or combined with something like for the Emperor, it can create big board swings. And it's just overall very effective. It's a very nice tool within the deck. Then you have Ultra. Ultra is a card that is in here to shut down like sometimes the answers that would really mess you up. For example, something like a board clear, like carpet bombing, or some key removal card on your Hurricane that has been buffed up. Very useful at sneakily catching people and really just destroying them and any chance they have of winning. Definitely most effective once you start getting to like turn to 8 credits or 9 credits, as early on you're often wanting to spend credits towards building your board, attacking and dealing with their own stuff. But definitely later on, Ultra can become game winning if it lands on the right card at the right time. Then you have the P40 KITTYHAWK. Everybody has this card. KITTYHAWK is really, really good. You pretty much always play this in any British deck. Notably, it does say any ground target, so it is able to hit the HQ. And as such, it is very, very good at just helping to add maybe a little bit more damage while also just adding like a fighter to the board. It can act as removal. It's just really good in general. Next up, you have Calm Before the Storm. Calm Before the Storm is a card that has been cropping up in a lot of decks that have been running Japan because it's a very potent board buff. Paying 3 credits to give your units +3/+1 turns them into must-kill threats. For example, combined with the Swordfish or the Gladiator, they become 4/4s. That is really strong. It makes the Hurricane into a 6/4. KITTYHAWK, even KITTYHAWK, something like this, becomes a 5/4. And that's just really hard to answer. You do have to end your turn, so you always want to play this as your last card with your last 3 credits. You never ever want to play, make sure to never make the mistake of playing this first and then realizing you've just ended your turn. It makes Calm Before the Storm very, very powerful though. And definitely in the mid game, if you've built up a decent board with like a couple Swordfish or Gladiators and you play this, sometimes the enemy just can't deal with it and they die. So that's why that's there. Then you have the Empire Strikes. This is your carpet stand-in. As we'll talk about in a minute, there's no carpet bombings in this deck, which is because of Empire Strikes. The amount of bombers we have in the deck between stuff like the Swordfish, ALBACORE, and HMS ILLUSTRIOUS, it's not difficult to often play 1 or 2 bombers and then Empire Strikes, which makes this into a carpet bombing that hits the enemy face, often for cheaper. It's a very effective stand-in, and specifically for British Air, it's very useful. Again, that face damage is actually really important also, as you're able to just very effectively just really kill the enemy. It helps to reach like lethal while also clearing away like guards or annoying smokescreen units or even just an annoying board presence. Empire Strikes is definitely a very good card, if specifically in British Air. Then you have the RAAF Lightning F-4. This is just a really good 5-drop. Retreating an enemy unit is very useful because you're able to just bounce a guard or some big unit. It definitely can buy you a lot of time and is a very high tempo card, which is very useful for this deck, as it allows you to continue to snowball the board in your favor because you're also putting out a 3/5 fighter that is, you know, going to get buffed from like any of your buffs like close air support, you know, or it can work with burst of fire. It's just overall very effective. Next up, you have Shelling. Shelling is just a very effective card. It's essentially like a big Monty in a way, but with some different effects. You are definitely paying a lot more than Monty, but granted, Monty's like really insane. But being able to deal damage to everything and pin them often buys you an entire turn, and then also the enemy losing a credit slot, although it's not always important, it can actually be a very useful tool because sometimes that stops the enemy from playing their board clear or something crucial, and then they suddenly just die. And that's just really, really nice overall. It's a very effective card. Moving on, you have the Sexton. This card doesn't have a lot of synergy within the deck, but it's just really good at stalling. A 3/4 artillery piece for 5 credits is pretty well. It's a pretty big artillery piece. And then you just pin an enemy unit, and it'll be continuously pinned until the Sexton is removed. It's very good at tying down like a big threat, and unless the enemy can remove the Sexton, that big threat might as well not exist. It's almost like the Japanese Sendai infantry. In a way, in that you just permanently remove a card until that is killed. But the Sexton can really apply pressure because it's got that 3/4 stat line, and it's also very good at just being, you know, a target for something like close air support. Next up, you have the MOSQUITO FB Mk VI, and this is just another really good British air unit. You just deal 3 you get a deal 3 damage to an enemy unit from the people on top of a 4/4 fighter. Really good at often killing small units or medium-sized units that are damaged, while also just continuing to build your board in line with stuff like RAF and the KITTYHAWK. It's just good at applying high tempo. And the final card in the deck is Lend-Lease. Lend-Lease is a 7-credit draw 4, and this is a big late game refill. Alongside the convoys, Convoy itself definitely is very useful, but it also isn't always enough draw. If you rely on just 4 convoys, you can run out of cards, especially late game. This is where the single copy of Lend-Lease comes in, which allows you to have one last big late game refill, you know, probably trying to dig for some sort of burst combo with a fighter like the Hurricane and Finest Hour, or stuff like that, in order to try to close the game out. But that is the list. In terms of mulligan, you are definitely wanting to look for gladiators or swordfishes. Those two are the most important. Albacore is also another really good one. If you have one of those, I would also consider keeping air superiority. Although, one caveat is that if you know what your enemy is playing, then sometimes it is correct to ditch air superiority. For example, if you're playing against something like a known British control deck, you don't want to keep air superiority. You don't need it. You're looking to have more bombers and buffs and trying to overwhelm them quickly. Air superiority is best in aggro matchups, as it's able to very quickly kill off like a 1-3 tank or something like that, and that can throw the enemy's game plan way off. Beyond that, beyond the 3 units, close air support can be very effective if you know the enemy deck. Namely, there are a couple decks that don't really have a way to answer an early close air support. That can be stuff like US decks can have a hard time dealing with it. There's also Japanese decks, like Jagro can have a really hard time dealing with close air support, as for the most part, they only run Sendai to remove it. So being able to make like even just like a 3-5 bomber is game ending against Japan aggro. Other good cards to keep. The KITTYHAWK is also really good to keep around. Monty can be useful. The Illustrious is also good, but definitely the main mulligans are for gladiators, swordfishes, and albacores. You want one of those in your starting hand almost in every single game. And then after that, you're looking for ways to buff them, some card draw, and some extra units to play out. As I said, the general game plan is that you often are looking to apply good pressure with your early big air units, using the powerful deployment effects to stall the enemy and build your own momentum, and then often using close air support to hit them really hard in one turn. And if the game starts dragging out, you have some control tools and some removal to keep them on the back foot. And then you're looking to often try to use Finest Hour alongside Burst of Fire, maybe for the Emperor also. And you're looking to have a big burst turn. And you essentially kind of create like a big blitzkrieg. And that'll often kill the enemy. In terms of cards you could put in instead, there's not a whole lot of options, and you're kind of limited in what you would even want to run. The air options are not particularly amazing. The RAF Buffalo is a card, but it's not particularly effective. If you're on a budget, I could recommend it. Like if you're missing albacores, it's not the same thing, but the buffaloes can do the job decently enough. They essentially have like heavy armor against aggro, because they're able to attack and then they gain +1/+1 if they don't die. So if you get them in the front line, that can be a little annoying. That can be a nice little benefit. But otherwise, it would just be another cheap fighter, which is fine, because sometimes you just need, you know, it allows your stuff like Burst of Fire to be more effective. Beyond that, though, there just isn't a whole lot. You could run a Lancaster, which is just like a big blitz plane. It's not going to be the most effective, but sometimes it can be annoying and really, you know, knock them down a peg. On the Japanese side, there isn't a whole lot either. There are a couple things, though. The B7A2 Ryusei can be effective. It's a very good tempo card, although it can never hit the enemy HQ, so it's more so of like a control tool. If you wanted to lean more into a control option, you can do it. But again, it's also kind of awkward because close air support requires British air units, although notably the Empire Strikes doesn't. So the Ryusei could have uses in here. It might also be like a good replacement for like the Albacores if you're missing them. You could also look into a B6 and Tenzan. It's very expensive, so you don't want to run many of it, but it is kind of like a mixture between the Sexton being able to pin an enemy unit when it comes in, but it pairs really nicely with stuff like Monty, Albacore, and Shelling being able to blow units up. You could give the deck a bit of hard removal in that manner then, which could have a useful effect. Beyond that, I don't think there's a lot else that you would really want, though. Most of these cards, you could run, I guess, like Code of Bushido, but you really aren't looking to kill your air units. You're more so looking to do things, but you could run it if you're running into a lot of aggro, maybe, because Empire Strikes, you know, you can start getting 3 to 4 board clears, but you may also just want to run Carpet at that point. You know, like if you really are having that much trouble, then Carpet is probably a better option. You could also look into Empire of the Sun. Instead of Lend-Lease, Empire of the Sun is hard removal, which is very nice late game, and it draws you often more cards than that. So this could be an interesting swap out that you could try out. And then... beyond that, as I said, Carpet Bombing could be an option. Also, Rule Britannia. You have actually a fair amount of fighters that are... You have a lot of units that are often low in attack but high in health, and Rule Britannia could be quite effective here. With a Swordfish, you make them into 5/5s. Albacores become 4/4s. Stuff like RAAF Lightning becomes a 7/7. So Rule Britannia could actually be a good option. But beyond that... you know, so there's definitely like a lot of room, and as with almost every deck in Cards, you pretty much always have options to test around and mess around with. But the list that is currently here and the one that's in the description is very powerful. And I actually have a couple games to show you, so let's go get into those and see where and see how we do. And I'll be back with you after those. Alright, I am back after those games. As you saw, they were actually quite on the quick side. That first Soviet value game definitely dragged out a little bit, and we managed to just barely eke it out after that annoying engineer kept saving him at the with just like 1 or 2 health. But we managed to close it out. And then the other games, as you saw, were really quick in their gameplay time. And that is kind of how British Air ends up working, is that there are a lot of games where you very quickly get out of control or very quickly fall apart and then just die. Obviously, that Soviet aggro deck, or against the German tank deck, we were able to get that front line, land a couple buffs, and he had nothing to deal with it. He was going to run his head face first into it and lose all his units, and we would probably have tempoed him out from there. And then against the other British air deck, we sadly just went second and didn't have the ability to contest that early swordfish that he kept buffing up, and he just barely managed to overcome us. And it just snowballed into a quick loss with that big hurricane that I had no answers to. It was definitely, it could have swung a little different if maybe I had drawn a little in a couple different ways, but, you know, that's how the game is. Sometimes it just doesn't go in your favor. But regardless, that is it for today. If you like this content, make sure to like and subscribe, and then in the comments down below, make sure to tell me how this deck is doing. You know, definitely these decks are very powerful. I've definitely been enjoying the decks that I'm getting from the OCC. They're definitely powerful, but still different, and there's still room for customizability. You know, but definitely having a lot of fun doing these. So, with that said, that's about it. I want to thank you so much for watching, and have a good day.